Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere the map forgot. Deep into the Amazon rainforest, not the version from postcards or documentaries, but a place that hums beneath the vines. A city without concrete, traffic, or time zones. No GPS signal. No exit through the gift shop. And yet, somehow, you'll find yourself exactly where you're supposed to be. But fair warning, you might not last a day out here, not because it's dangerous, but because this place doesn't play by your usual rules. There are no signs, no schedules. If you lose track of where you are, well, that might be part of the point. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment telling me what time it is where you're listening from, and what city you're in tonight. I always love knowing who's drifting off with me from across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive by river, of course. There are no roads this deep. The boat you're in is narrow, carved from a single trunk, and it moves like a quiet thought across water. Behind you, the modern world dissolves, cell towers, car horns, blinking screens. Ahead, green. Just endless green. Then something strange happens. The forest shifts. Not visibly. More like it's watching. The trees seem taller, the air heavier, but not unpleasant. There's a warmth to it. You hear a rhythm in the distance. Drums? No, not drums. It's the frogs. Singing in sync like they've rehearsed this for centuries. You don't so much arrive at the city as notice you're already inside it. No walls mark the boundary. No archways or welcome signs. But there's a feeling in the ground. You step off the boat and the soil is dark, rich, almost fluffy, as if generations have cared for it like a family quilt. This is terra preta, or black earth. Historians are still arguing over how it got here. Some say it was created by thousands of years of intentional composting. Charred wood, fish bones, food scraps, layered and worked over by generations. Others think it was a lucky accident. But one thing's clear, this soil grows anything. Even the idea of a city. You don't see any buildings. Not the kind you're used to, anyway. There are structures, sure. Some look like enormous woven baskets turned upside down. Others resemble half-finished treehouses. But everything blends into the jungle so well you almost trip over a home before realizing it's a home. The first person you meet is barefoot, tattooed, and carrying a basket on their head filled with leaves and what might be tiny bananas or very large insects. They smile. You smile. No words exchanged. You follow. And just like that, you're part of something. It doesn't matter that you don't know the language, or the rituals, or how to tell which frog noises mean rain's coming versus don't touch that plant. You're welcomed in like a leaf landing gently on a river's surface. That evening, you're shown to your sleeping place. It's not a bed. It's a woven mat, gently slung between two poles under a canopy of broad leaves. Above you, stars blink between branches. Nearby, someone hums a lullaby that makes you sleepy even though you don't understand a word. You fall asleep wondering if you imagined it all. By morning, you know you didn't. The city was never lost. It just didn't care if anyone found it. And now that you're here, it's not going to explain itself in a rush. It moves slowly, like roots growing, like stories told over generations. If you want to understand this place, you'll have to do something unusual. Stay still. Watch. Listen. Let the city tell you how it works. Because this place isn't about monuments or maps. It's about rhythms. And tonight, you've started to learn the beat. You wake to smoke, gentle, sweet, like someone's brewing dreams just past the tree line. It doesn't sting your eyes. It wraps around your senses like a scarf, warm and oddly reassuring. A soft clinking sound follows, wood on stone, or maybe shells tapping. You sit up in your woven mat, your back stiff but your breath unusually deep. The jungle isn't silent, but it's not loud either. It murmurs. The person who led you here yesterday is already up, crouching beside a shallow clay dish where something steams. They look at you, nod, then pat the ground beside them. You join, careful not to sit on what might be a sacred beetle. This is your first morning ritual, and it starts with fire. But not the fire you're used to. No matches, no lighters. Just 2 sticks, friction, patience, and a kind of reverence. The ember that sparks is fed into a bundle of moss and bark, coaxed like a sleepy child, until the smoke curls upward. Then comes the drink. It's dark, bitter, served in a gourd. You're warned, by hand gesture, that this is not for enjoyment. It's not dangerous, but it will wake you up in ways coffee never could. The first sip is like licking a river rock. The second, your brain starts to hum. This beverage, you learn, is made from a mix of herbs, tree bark, and a root that has a name you can't pronounce and a smell you might never forget. It's not psychedelic. It's something else, something to align your senses with the city's rhythm. Historians suspect these kinds of brews were mood modulators, early plant-based chemistry used not for partying, but for harmony. Some even argue that cities like this one used communal pharmacology to manage stress, sleep, and social cohesion. But academic theories don't do justice to what happens next. You're invited to exhale. No, really, that's the ritual. Breathe in, breathe out, but with focus. The kind of focus that makes you aware of the way your breath fogs in the morning air, or how your shoulders loosen just a bit with every release. Smoke wafts over your body, guided by a hand holding a bundle of herbs tied together with red thread. You're not being purified. You're being introduced. To the forest, someone whispers. To yourself, adds another. Then silence. You sit there, breathing, half lucid, while birds start their gossip in the canopy above. The sun filters through the leaves in long golden slants, catching on dust motes and winged things. Somewhere, a monkey laughs at you, or maybe with you. A child walks past, smearing something orange on their face with both hands. It's not war paint. It's sunscreen, jungle style, pulp from a seed that reflects sunlight and smells faintly of citrus and soil. You look around. No clocks. No schedules. But there's clearly a structure. People move with intention, but not urgency. Some are preparing food, others are weaving, a few are still just sitting. It dawns on you, stillness is part of the plan. This city wakes up slowly, on purpose. Rushing is considered suspicious. What are you running from? The smoke fades, the gourd is empty, and your guide finally speaks. One soft word and a gesture. Follow me. But this isn't just a stroll. It's a walking meditation, and you're expected to keep quiet. You learn the rhythm of their steps. Heel, toe, pause, look, smell, step again. It's here, in this slow dance of movement and awareness, that the city begins to show itself. Not in grand buildings or bronze statues, but in the morning behaviors. The specific way a man lifts a bowl of water to the sunrise. The way 2 elders touch foreheads before parting. The way children step around certain trees with exaggerated care. There's meaning here. You don't understand all of it yet. Maybe you never will. And that's okay. Because here, the morning isn't a prelude to real life. The morning is the point. A collective moment to tune the entire city like an instrument before it begins to play. Some researchers theorize that such rituals were what allowed large, non-hierarchical communities to function. Emotional calibration through shared rhythm, rather than laws. It's not confirmed. Scholars still debate whether this was spiritual, medicinal, or just routine. But as the smoke rises and fades, as the sun begins to lift itself over the treetops, one thing becomes clear. You're not just waking up. You're arriving. You follow your guide through a lattice of green, paths that aren't marked but somehow feel well trodden. No pavement, no trail signs, just the soft crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional vine brushing your shoulder like a sleepy cat. The city continues to unfold, but instead of leading you to a marketplace or plaza, your guide stops beside what looks like an overgrown garden. Except it's not overgrown. It's a food forest, a deliberate layering of plants, each chosen for its purpose. Food, medicine, shade, or even gossip. Yes, gossip. Some trees are planted not just for fruit, but because they make a noise when the wind hits their leaves, a rustling that lets neighbors know who's up and about. Your guide gestures to the canopy where fruits dangle like chandeliers. Papayas, star apples, and something that looks like a spiky mango crossed with a pine cone. Beneath them grow cassava shrubs, medicinal herbs, even fungi cultivated on rotting logs. You're handed a red fruit that looks suspiciously like a jelly bean. It tastes like sweet rain and pepper. You chew it thoughtfully, then realize your guide has already moved on. In this city, farming doesn't happen in fields. It happens in layers. Each plant stacked with intention, mimicking the forest itself. Western archaeologists once assumed the Amazon couldn't support large populations. Too dense, too hostile. But here you are, standing in what researchers now call an anthropogenic biome, a human-made ecosystem designed not to conquer nature, but to live inside it. There are no fences, no rows. Nothing is forced to grow. Everything wants to be here. Even the pests have a role. Certain bugs are welcomed because their presence signals seasonal changes. A specific type of ant showing up means it's time to plant sweet tubers. And yes, the people here plant by moon cycles, though they'll never explain it in a way that satisfies a botanist. The moon knows, they say. That's enough. You kneel beside a woman pressing manioc dough into flat rounds, laying them on a hot stone. The smell is warm and earthy. She offers you one. You bite in and it's chewy, with a faint nuttiness. This is farina, a kind of cassava bread, staple of the jungle. But don't be fooled, it's not easy food. The cassava root is toxic unless processed correctly. It must be peeled, grated, soaked, squeezed, dried, toasted. It's a full-day ritual that no one rushes. The poison is washed away not just by water, but by time. Some anthropologists still puzzle over why ancient people chose such a labor-intensive crop. Others argue it wasn't a choice, it was a bond. A kind of culinary contract with the land. You don't just take, you transform. And in doing so, you understand it better. You're handed a drink made from fermented fruit, mild, fizzy, and slightly sour. Everyone drinks it, even children. Not to get drunk, but to hydrate and build gut resilience. You sip, and suddenly feel very aware of your own digestive system. A dog saunters by. Then a chicken. Then a parrot. You're not sure who owns who here. Someone laughs softly and points upward. A monkey is watching you, hanging upside down from a branch. He seems unimpressed. You eat like a child, his eyes say. Fair enough. You try again, this time mimicking the careful two-handed way locals drink from a gourd. It helps. The monkey blinks slowly. Maybe you passed the test. The garden shifts around you. It doesn't feel static. It breathes. Every plant here is a sentence in a language you don't speak. But you're starting to catch the rhythm. Harvest happens when the plants say yes. Not before. Not because a calendar told you so. And the compost pile? Oh, it's not hidden. It's central. Waste is celebrated here. Scraps go back to the soil, carried in woven baskets and returned with a quiet kind of pride. Nothing is discarded. Everything is reabsorbed. It's a closed loop, but it feels open. You realize that farming, here, is not seasonal labor. It's daily conversation. And you're starting to understand the grammar. You follow the scent of wood smoke and roasted root vegetables into a clearing where the city's quiet becomes communal. It's not a dining hall, it's an open-air circle, shaded by palms, with low wooden platforms that serve as seats, beds, and stages depending on the time of day. Right now, it's mealtime. And like everything else here, it flows more like a ceremony than a task. No one clangs a bell or calls out. People just start to gather. Children weave between adults, carrying woven bowls full of roasted bananas and strips of fish smoked to a perfect leather-like chewiness. You're offered a bowl, not your own, but shared. Hands dip in without fuss. No one counts portions. The rule seems to be, if your fingers reach the food, you're welcome to it. You sit beside an elder who's chewing something with an alarming red tint. It stains her teeth crimson, but she grins warmly and offers you a small leaf parcel. You unwrap it. Inside is a mix of mashed nuts, something spicy, and what might be crushed insects. You eat it. It's good? Crunchy, with a tang that makes your eyes water but clears your sinuses instantly. The elder chuckles. Strong, she says, tapping her chest. You nod, sniffling. This isn't just lunch. It's a knowledge exchange. Food here is memory, medicine, and message. That spicy nut insect mash? It's a digestive aid. The roasted banana with its skin crisped like sugar? That's for energy. The leaves everyone's chewing? They keep mosquitoes away. It's all been thought through, not in a lab, but over centuries of trying, tasting, and telling stories. And stories are everywhere. While you chew, someone begins a song. No instruments, just voice. It starts slow, like a hum, then others join in, layering harmonies that rise and fall like the river. You don't understand the words, but you catch the emotion. Playful, nostalgic, like someone telling a bedtime story with a wink. The song isn't a performance. It's a part of lunch, like salt or sunlight. Historians debate whether cities like this had music in the way we define it, written scales, formal instruments, but they agree that sound was central. Rhythm guided planting, songs taught recipes, and some melodies were never sung unless the moon was full. One researcher even suggested that the layout of some Amazonian settlements mimicked the acoustic flow of communal gatherings. That idea hasn't been proven, but as the song wraps around you, echoing gently through the trees, you begin to wonder if the city is a song. After eating, no one jumps up to leave. Rest is built in. You lie back on a slanted plank, watching a hawk circle above the canopy. A child drapes a leaf over your foot like a blanket. Somewhere, someone snores, soft, rhythmic, unashamed. Digestion here is a group activity. No laptops. No coffee runs. Just chewing, chatting, and the occasional insect brushing your ankle. And then comes the smoke again. Not for purification this time, but for bugs. A smoldering bundle of herbs is passed around like incense. It smells of citrus and pine and something sharp you can't name. You wave it around yourself, mostly to mimic others. But it works. The mosquitoes seem to respect the boundary. A woman begins to paint a child's face with clay. Not for ritual, just for fun. Little dots, lines, swirls. The child giggles and paints her back. Someone tosses a fruit the size of a bowling ball into the center. It bursts open, bright orange flesh and dozens of black seeds. It's shared immediately. No one says who brought it. No one needs to. You realize something odd. There are no plates. No cutlery. Everything is eaten from hands, leaves, or communal bowls. And no one seems to mind. It's not unhygienic. It's just closer, more present. No buffer between food and fingers. Between people. In this city, eating isn't just nourishment. It's a map of relationships. Who sits where, who shares with whom, which child brings food to which elder. All of it tells a story. And you, the outsider, are slowly becoming a paragraph in that story. Your fingers are sticky, your belly is warm, and your heart feels like it's humming in tune with the slow, steady rhythm of this forested life. The sun climbs higher now, filtering through the canopy like a lazy golden river, dappling your skin in warm patches. Bellies full, feet dusty, you wander toward the sound of rhythmic tapping. Not urgent. Not loud. Just persistent, like someone's drumming out a recipe with their fingertips. You round a bend and find a group gathered around a long bench made from a single curved tree trunk. At first glance, it looks like they're weaving. But on closer inspection, they're doing something far more complicated. They're making baskets that tell time. One woman threads long, flexible vines through a crisscrossed frame. Each wrap and twist has a name, a rhythm, and, somehow, a memory. You're told that certain weaves mark rainy seasons, others record a birth or a big hunt. The finished basket isn't just for carrying, It's a calendar, a story, and sometimes a joke. A teenager invites you to try. Your fingers fumble. The vines don't listen. You loop too tight. You snap one. The others laugh, not cruelly, more like a big sibling watching you learn to ride a bike into a tree. The teen shows you again. Under, over, twist, tap. There's a chant to go with it, a steady 1-2 rhythm that feels like a heartbeat. You hum along, weaving the way a beginner writes poetry. Messy, sincere, a little lopsided. Historians still debate the role of these crafts. Were they utilitarian? Symbolic? Both. One theory suggests that in cities like this, crafts weren't divided by gender or class but by affinity. You did what you were good at and what you liked. Some people made tools. Others made art. Often, it was the same object. A boy nearby carves a fishing hook from bone. He's maybe 8 years old, but his hands are sure, practiced. He pauses to check the curve against the pad of his thumb, then continues. The tool isn't shaped by speed, it's shaped by rhythm. A beat in his head that only he hears. A woman beside him is threading beads, no, seeds, onto a cord. You recognize one as the fruit you ate earlier. She notices your glance, smiles, and points to her necklace. Each seed tells a story. One for her grandmother. One for a flood. One for a fever that passed without taking anyone. The necklace isn't ornamental. It's a diary. Your guide, who's been watching you with a quiet grin, hands you something smooth and cool. A small stone etched with spirals. For luck, they say. Or for looking busy. You're not sure if they're joking. The sun continues its gentle slouch across the sky, and you realize time here is marked by hands, not clocks. The pace is set by repetition, not reminders. When the baskets pile high, it's time to trade. When the stone is warm in your palm, it's probably late afternoon. There are no factories, no roaring machines, but there is industry. Quiet, skilled, deeply personal industry. People work beside each other, not because they must, but because they can. Conversation flows around you, mostly in the form of gesture and laughter. You catch a joke about someone who made a basket so big, it floated down the river like a canoe. You try to laugh like you understood. By the time you finally managed a 3-inch square of weaving that doesn't immediately fall apart, the teen pats your shoulder like you've earned a badge. You haven't. But you've stayed. You've tried. And here, that counts for something. As you stand, a breeze catches the leaves above and rustles the canopy into applause. Or maybe it's just wind. Either way, you feel like the forest approves. You follow your guide again, but this time there's no destination. Just movement. Wandering, really, but with intention, the way a river wanders. You pass between towering trees with trunks the width of water tanks, their roots arching out like frozen waves. The light is shifting, more amber now, with shadows stretching long and lazy. It's the kind of hour that makes everything feel like a secret. And speaking of secrets, you ask how people here navigate without paths. Your guide just raises an eyebrow and says, "We don't walk on paths. We walk with them." It sounds like something a wise character says before disappearing in a movie, but here it's just common sense. You start to notice the markers. A bent branch, a line of fire ants detouring around a stone, the sound of a certain bird. Paths here aren't made by feet, but by familiarity. 1,000 microsignals, layered over generations. If you're paying attention, the forest speaks. You come to a raised mound. It's not tall, but it's wide and unnaturally flat on top. Your guide steps onto it, gently taps the ground with their heel, and says, "Old house." You realize you're standing in the foundation of someone's long-forgotten home. Or not forgotten, absorbed. The jungle didn't erase it. It kept it safe. Archaeologists call these terra preta sites, pockets of dark, fertile earth created by ancient Amazonian people. The soil is rich in charcoal, bone, and composted matter. It doesn't wash away like normal rainforest dirt. It thrives. Which is funny, because for centuries, Europeans thought the Amazon couldn't grow anything useful. Turns out, it was growing cities the whole time. The soil under your feet is human-made. Not recently. Not with bulldozers. With patience. With food scraps, fire ash, fish bones. The waste of centuries turned into treasure. You kneel down and scoop a handful. It smells like rain and history. Nearby, a woman is planting something. Tiny, vivid green shoots. You ask what they are. She shrugs and says, "We'll see." It's not vague. It's hopeful. Some seeds don't have names yet. They're experiments. Additions to the ongoing recipe that is this soil, this city. Children chase each other through the undergrowth, their feet bare and confident. You flinch every time they dive near thorny vines, but they never so much as wince. They know which leaves sting and which ones soothe. One skids to a stop, plucks a flower, and tucks it behind your ear. To confuse the ants, she says. You're not sure if she's teasing. You pass what looks like a low stone wall, but your guide shakes their head. Old canal. It once carried water from the river to this part of the city. Maybe for drinking. Maybe for cooling down. Maybe just to hear it gurgle. The purpose isn't always clear, but the intent is. Someone made this. With thought. With care. Not to survive the forest, but to live in it. Scholars are still debating just how organized these cities were. Were they states? Chiefdoms? Loose confederations? There's no consensus. What's clear is that they had infrastructure. Not like Rome, with marble columns, but with routes, rhythms, and rules that made sense for their world. You realize you're walking through more than ruins. You're walking through a memory that never left. The forest didn't consume this city out of spite. It partnered with it, grew around it like a soft exhale, preserved it not in stone, but in soil, in seeds, in habit. Your guide stops beneath a giant tree and taps its trunk. This one's seen everything, they say. You look up. The canopy is so high it seems to hum. You can't help but place your hand on the bark. It's warm, steady, alive. As the forest dims into a cooler green, you begin to notice a shift in sound. The sharp chirps of daytime insects fade, replaced by a gentle percussion of frogs, leaves, and something like a whispering flute in the wind. You're told this is the time for stories, and no one rushes to prepare. Instead, people begin to gather in the clearing you now recognize as a kind of open-air theater. There's no stage, no script, just a circle of packed earth, lit softly by fireflies and a few carefully banked coals. You're offered a seat, not by word, but by gesture. Someone pats the ground beside them and smiles. You sit. A man stands slowly in the center. He wears a simple wrap, his hair pulled back with woven twine, and a feather tucked behind his ear, not grand, but intentional. He clears his throat, then begins, not with words, but with a low hum that rises and falls like the tide. It builds slowly into language. You don't understand the words, but somehow, you do. This is oral history, and it's doing more than recounting the past, it's inviting you to feel it. The story is about a girl who once tricked a jaguar by pretending to be a rock. Then she tricked the river into giving her its reflection. Then she tricked time itself, though that part's a bit fuzzy. Everyone laughs when the jaguar gets outwitted, especially the kids. It's clear this isn't just mythology. It's a cultural operating system, teaching caution, creativity, and maybe how to laugh at danger just enough to survive it. A scholar might call this mythopoetic memory encoding. You call it bedtime storytelling with a bite. Someone else joins the man, adding gestures. Then a third person steps in with a percussion instrument made of hollow gourds. Soon it's a group performance, blending voices and movement. The story becomes a scene, the scene a lesson, the lesson a rhythm. You glance around. Everyone is watching, yes, but also remembering. You get the feeling that some of them have heard this story 100 times. And yet they lean in, alert, like it might end differently tonight. Anthropologists argue about how accurate oral histories are. Some insist they're warped by memory, made unreliable over generations. Others point out that accuracy isn't always the point. A story like this can change a little every time it's told, adapting like a vine to the trellis of time. And besides, you think, sitting there under the stars, what's more alive, a dusty scroll in a glass case, or a tale that still makes kids giggle 300 years later? The performance ends not with applause, but with silence. The storyteller bows their head, the crowd bows back. No one speaks for a few breaths. You feel something settle in your chest, a warmth, like recognition. Someone taps your shoulder. They hand you a carved stone with a spiral etched into it. This means you're part of the story now, they say. You want to ask what that means, but something tells you it's not a question you're supposed to answer out loud. As people begin to drift away, you stay seated, staring at the embers. One of the older children lingers beside you, gently sketching spirals in the dirt with a stick. "Want me to teach you the trick she used on the jaguar?" the child whispers. You nod. Because, honestly, it feels like you're going to need it. The next morning arrives not with an alarm, but with the drip-drip of dew sliding off giant leaves and a chorus of distant bird calls that sound like badly tuned flutes. You blink awake inside your leaf shelter, the air warm and sticky like the inside of a ripe fruit. Your guide greets you with a nod and a bundle of something tied in bark cloth. "Today's your turn," they say, and hand you the bundle. Inside, a pot of ink the color of river silt, a needle carved from fishbone, and a curved mirror made of polished shell. You guessed it might come to this. It's tattoo day. You follow them toward a shaded platform raised on stilts. It's half workshop, half clinic, half art studio. Yes, 3 halves. Math isn't the point here. A woman sits cross-legged, humming softly while grinding charcoal into finer dust. She doesn't look up when you approach. Just gestures for you to sit and bare your arm. You comply, though your nerves bounce like tree frogs. The woman speaks for the first time. "Don't worry. First tattoos are supposed to look a little silly." Then she winks. Comforting. As she works, your guide explains the city's practice. Tattoos here are not decorations. They're records. Visual diaries. Your ink will mark your arrival, the story you witnessed last night, and your disastrous basket weaving attempt. That last one will be tiny, but still included, for honesty. Each line and dot tells someone something. A double spiral might mean newcomer who helped with planting. A jagged line could mean bitten by the wrong frog but lived. A small circle under a larger one saw a spirit in a puddle and didn't tell anyone. It's all very specific and very personal. Scholars still debate how much of this symbolism was shared among ancient Amazonian societies. Some argue that tattoos were used for clan identification. Others believe they were more spiritual, meant to guard the body, not just describe it. And still others think it was both, because in cities like this, practicality and mysticism are rarely separate. The tattooing doesn't hurt as much as you expected. It's more like being written on with a hot whisper. You try not to flinch, especially when she reaches a sensitive spot near your elbow. She chuckles, probably because everyone flinches there. A boy waits nearby with a small calabash bowl filled with a herbal paste. After the inking's done, he applies it to the fresh marks, sealing them with a layer of forest medicine. It stings a little, then cools into something soothing. You ask what's in it. He shrugs. Leaves. Some bug. Mostly magic. The mirror is handed to you. You inspect your arm. It's not what you expected. It's better. It feels less like an art piece and more like a password. As if your skin can now whisper to the trees, "Hey, I belong here too." You leave the platform with your new marks tingling gently. On the way back, a woman stops you, squints at your tattoo, and nods in approval. "Nice frog," she says. "You weren't told there was a frog in it." "Am I now officially a citizen?" you ask your guide. They grin. You're now officially part of the gossip. As the afternoon heat settles over the city like a damp blanket, you sit beneath a fruit tree and trace your tattooed arm, memorizing the story you're now wearing. Somewhere nearby, someone starts singing a tune you heard during last night's performance. And for a brief moment, you wonder what mark this city would have left on you if you'd never seen it. You're woken not by sound, but by movement, a hush rolling through the trees like a held breath. It's evening again, but this one feels different. Anticipatory. Your guide appears at your side and simply says, "Bring no questions. Just eyes." You follow a winding trail lit by glow beetles tethered to strings of vine. The forest around you hums low, like it's warming up for something. You arrive at a clearing much larger than before, flattened earth, rimmed with woven torches, and above, a sky stitched with stars. People gather silently, children perched on shoulders, elders seated on polished stones. The space feels sacred but not solemn. There's an energy here, not religious, exactly, but communal, like a surprise party the universe is throwing itself. Then it begins. A single frog croaks from the shadows. Another answers. Then another. Until the night itself becomes an orchestra of chirps, burps, and rhythm. And just when you think it's a natural coincidence, a figure steps into the circle wearing a mask that looks like a tree root carved into a frown. This is no accident. This is theater. The play unfolds in silence at first. Performers in bark and leaf costumes mime exaggerated gestures. One carries a stick bent like a fishing hook, another moves with the grace of someone who knows they're being watched by the moon. The story, as your guide later whispers, is an ancient one, the tale of a man who tried to steal light from the sky. He built a ladder of snakes and regrets, reached the stars, and swallowed one whole. Then, of course, everything went hilariously wrong. The frogs laugh first, then the audience follows. It's hard to explain. There are no words, no subtitles, and yet the meaning is crystal clear. Even the mistakes, one actor trips, another drops their prop, are absorbed into the performance, like they were meant to happen. Maybe they were. Scholars have long argued whether Amazonian societies practiced structured drama. Some say it was just ritual. Others insist these were full-blown performances with roles, rehearsal, and even satire. Watching this, you lean toward the latter. There's timing. There's humor. There's even a bit where one actor mocks the way foreigners walk, complete with floppy arm gestures. You laugh a little too loud. As the show crescendos, the frogs fall quiet, almost on cue. A single drumbeat echoes, slow and steady, as dancers form a circle. Firelight catches on beads and feathers, and for a moment, the entire scene looks like it's underwater. You don't clap when it ends. No one does. Applause isn't part of the vocabulary here. Instead, people hum softly, a low vibration that seems to thank both the performers and the forest. The actors bow, masks removed, faces sweaty but proud. One child runs to hug the moon thief actor. "You were bad again," she says. "Next time, don't eat the star." As the crowd disperses, your guide leans close. That play. It's over 1,000 years old. The ending changes depending on who's watching. You glance up at the stars. Still there. Mostly. You think you might have caught one winking. And just like that, you realize, this city doesn't just preserve its stories. It performs them. Night after night. Not to remember the past, but to keep it dancing. This morning starts with something unexpected. Quiet. No chattering birds, no yammering frogs, not even the buzz of bees. It's a hush that feels full, like the whole forest is holding its breath. You step outside and immediately know why. Today is feast day. But not the kind you might imagine. No long tables, no shouting over each other for the last slice of roasted anything. Here, the feast is more like a meditation. A ritual. A moment stretched wide and soft like fresh dough. The preparations begin without fuss. No yelling, no kitchen disasters. Just a slow rhythm of hands grinding roots, slicing fruits, and wrapping things in leaves with a focus that feels reverent. Children fairy bowls and wooden spoons. The elders whisper adjustments to recipes that have never been written down. Every motion is part of a larger, invisible choreography. You're handed a job, pit the nuts. You nod seriously, as if you've done this your whole life. You haven't. The nuts are small, stubborn, and slightly smug, but eventually, you get into a groove. Beside you, a young woman sings softly as she works. You don't understand the lyrics, but it sounds like she's teasing the ingredients. By midday, the air smells like roasted banana skins, fermented honey paste, and something unfamiliar but deeply comforting. But no one's sneaking tastes. No one's hovering. Everyone's simply waiting. And then it begins. The feast is laid out in a spiral pattern on the ground: bowls of mash, platters of fruit slices, steamed fish, strange pickled roots. Everyone takes a place around the spiral, sitting cross-legged or leaning back on woven mats. Before a single bite is eaten, someone begins to speak. It's not a prayer or a blessing in the traditional sense. It's a story. A personal one. About a time they got lost in the forest and were found by a turtle. Not guided, found. It's funny and a little embarrassing, and it makes everyone smile. Then the person beside them adds something. Not a story, but a memory. Of a grandparent who used to hum while making this exact dish. Then another voice joins in. A joke. Then a song. It becomes clear, this feast isn't really about the food. It's a collage of memory and sound. Anthropologists still debate whether these kinds of communal meals were symbolic or practical. But watching this unfold, it's hard to see the difference. It's practical because people are eating. It's symbolic because no one eats alone. Finally, a child, who's clearly had enough of the emotional depth, grabs a fruit and starts munching. Everyone laughs. The meal begins. The flavors are complex: sweet, sour, smoky, and surprisingly soft. Nothing is oversalted or spiced aggressively. It's food that doesn't compete for attention. It's food that lets you relax. Someone hands you a drink made from fermented cashew fruit. It smells like a forest after rain. You take a sip, and suddenly you're half listening to another story, half floating. Not drunk, just perfectly unmoored. Hours pass this way. Not that anyone's counting. At some point, someone braids your hair while humming. Someone else falls asleep with a half-eaten yam in their lap. Even the dogs look contemplative. And when the sun begins to dip, you feel a fullness that has nothing to do with your stomach. It's the kind that sits somewhere between your lungs and your ribs. The kind of fullness that says, you belong here now, if only for this one day. The next morning is sticky, foggy, and a little mischievous, like the forest has decided to wear a veil and play hard to get. You squint through the haze and notice shapes moving between the trees. Not people. Birds. Bright ones. Loud ones. Some that look like they were painted during a creative crisis. Your guide hands you a long, curved whistle carved from bone. Today's a good day to learn the neighborhood, they say, gesturing toward the edge of the city. You walk, not on paths, but along ridgelines of earth worn smooth by centuries of feet. Eventually, you reach what looks like a tangle of vines. But then someone pulls aside a curtain of leaves and reveals it, the aviary gardens. It's not a zoo, not a sanctuary. It's more like a negotiated territory, where plants are grown not just to feed people, but to feed the creatures that feed the people. A small parrot flutters past your head and lands on a bowl of fermented fruit. Another, more cautious, eyes you from the branches like it's evaluating your vibe. Don't whistle until you mean it, your guide warns. You resist the urge. The people tending this space work quietly, gently. Some mimic bird calls. Others scatter specific seeds, not for planting, but for courting certain species. The goal isn't control, it's partnership. These birds aren't pets. They're allies. They eat pests. They distribute seeds. And some, if you're very polite, might even offer feathers for ceremonial use. One man introduces you to his favorite, a toucan with half a beak missing, named Lies. No one explains the name, but it feels appropriate. You learn that feathers here aren't just decorative. They're records. A bright red quill might signal a marriage. A striped green one could mean a lost relative has returned, in spirit or sometimes, in person. These meanings shift from village to village, family to family. Scholars argue about how consistent the code ever was. But that's the thing about symbolism. It works even when it doesn't make sense to outsiders. You finally raise the whistle to your lips and try a call. It sounds like a squirrel having a small breakdown. But one bird answers, a trill, high and dismissive. Still, it's something. Your guide smiles. They know your voice now. They'll gossip about you. You continue walking, stepping carefully over root bridges and stone markers etched with spirals and eyes. The air smells like crushed citrus and wet feathers. Overhead, birds swoop in and out of sunbeams, gossiping like 1,000 tiny ants. At one point, you reach a shallow pool where bright finches dip their wings. A woman sitting nearby is weaving feathers into a band, each arranged in a precise pattern. You ask if it's for decoration. She shakes her head. It's for remembering, she says. You sit beside her and watch as she knots a green feather next to a dull brown one. This one, she says, is my uncle's laugh. And this one, she nods toward a shimmering purple tip, is the day we saw the stars move sideways. You have no response, just quiet admiration, and maybe a touch of longing. As the sun begins to set, casting gold across every wing, you realize something. This isn't a city where humans dominate nature. It's a place where humans negotiate with it, whisper to it, apologize to it, laugh with it, and maybe, occasionally, win its trust. As night falls, you notice the city doesn't go dark, it shifts. The fireflies come out in slow pulses, casting a gentle rhythm of gold over every path and wall. Lanterns, if you can call them that, are made of hollowed gourds and glowing resin. They flicker like stars with stage fright. Tonight, your guide says, is for crafting. You're led to a low, circular hut where people sit in a ring, each with something in their hands. Bones, reeds, clay, bark, fibers. There's no single project, no obvious goal. Just creation. Some shape tools. Some carve masks. Others embroider lines of thread so fine they shimmer like spider silk. You're handed a small block of softwood and a knife that feels too sharp for your current level of jungle enlightenment. But you begin. Slowly. Awkwardly. You carve a curve that becomes a swirl that becomes, well, not much yet. But the person beside you nods like you've just unlocked an ancient truth. Someone across the circle is working on a musical gourd, a rattle filled with seeds that have been sorted by sound, not size. Each seed is tested by shaking it in a bowl and tilting an ear. Not for volume, but for tone. It's like watching someone tune a memory. Another person is crafting a ceremonial comb, the teeth of which are made from thorns, each carved with a tiny spiral. You ask who it's for. They shrug. The next person who needs to look like they remember something important. Historians often debate whether these Amazonian societies had fine art or only functional design. But as you watch someone tattoo a story onto a belt made of vines, you wonder why we ever tried to split the two. Here, beauty and function walk hand in hand. Or more accurately, they braid each other's hair. Someone brings over a piece of tree bark flattened into a canvas. They're painting with dyes made from crushed berries, clay, and something that smells like regret. The image is simple, a bird, mid-flight, with a tongue of fire for a tail. It's for my cousin, they say. He dreams this bird every week. Craft here isn't hobby. It's record. It's memory. It's therapy, gossip, and education all tangled into twine. You realize that the Amazonian city might not have libraries in the traditional sense, but it's full of portable knowledge. Every necklace, every drum, every spoon might contain a whole family's worth of stories, if you know how to read them. You go back to your carving. It's still a swirl. But now, maybe it's the river. Or a snake. Or the moment you first smelled roasted yam at sunrise. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be true. Someone begins to sing, a low, spiraling melody that doesn't demand attention but welcomes it. Others join in, humming under their breath. It's not a performance. It's background music for remembering. Your guide leans over and whispers. The city breathes through its hands. You nod. Yours are full of wood dust and mystery. Feels right. The night stretches on, gently. No one tells anyone to stop. Eventually, some begin to curl up on woven mats. A few keep crafting by the soft light of resin glow. Even in sleep, someone is braiding fibers into dreams. And you? You place your swirl carving beside you and lie down. The last thing you hear is a seed rattle shaking once, like a punctuation mark at the end of a very old sentence. You wake to rain. Not a downpour, more like the forest is whispering to itself. Each droplet taps the leaf roof above your head like a gentle nudge. Get up, it says. But slowly. Outside, the air is thick but cool. The paths are softer now, everything tinted darker, more saturated. This city looks good in the rain, like it's wearing its favorite version of itself. You're led to a structure that's not quite a house, not quite a temple. The walls are made of stacked stones and river mud, and the floor is a mosaic of crushed shells. No one's rushing. Inside, it's cool and dim, and the air smells of wet charcoal and sweet sap. Your guide says this is where the fading is practiced. You tilt your head. The what now? The fading, they repeat, as if it's the most normal thing in the world. And maybe here, it is. You're shown a bundle of tools, brushes, bone picks, hollow reeds. They're not for building. They're for erasing. And that's when it clicks. This city doesn't just grow things, it gently lets them go. An older woman demonstrates. She pulls a small carving from a shelf, a jaguar made of clay, and begins to gently smear its edges with water and her fingers. Bit by bit, the lines blur. Its eyes go soft. Its paws vanish into suggestion. In 5 minutes, it's not a jaguar anymore. It's mud again. This one told its story, she explains. Now it returns. In this society, to last too long is to risk becoming rigid. Everything has its season, a song, a mask, a path in the jungle. They believe that clinging to permanence makes you brittle. Letting things fade? That keeps you flexible. You think back to the spiral garden. The food was grown, eaten, forgotten, then planted again. Even the tattoos here aren't always permanent. Some are designed to disappear, made with dyes that fade within a year. Perfect for memories you're not sure you want to keep. Scholars have long debated whether this was intentional minimalism or simply the result of living in a humid, decay-prone environment. But watching a young boy blur his own chalk drawing into the dirt with reverence, you suspect it's a choice. You're handed your carving from the crafting hut. The swirl. It survived the night, mostly. A small crack has formed. Your guide raises an eyebrow. You can keep it, they say, but you don't have to. You look at it for a long moment. Then, without much ceremony, press it gently into the mud. It holds for a second, then softens, spreads, vanishes. Strangely, you don't feel loss. You feel lighter. Later, you walk through a path lined with half-covered stones, where faded carvings peek out like forgotten dreams. No one cleans them. No one restores them. They're allowed to go blurry with time. That's part of the design. This is a city built not just for thriving, but for disappearing well. And that might be the most revolutionary architecture of all. Your final full day in the city begins with smoke. Not the dangerous kind, this is breakfast smoke. Fragrant, deliberate, and slightly mischievous. You follow it like a cartoon character, nose first, to a clearing where round stones ring a slow fire. On top sits a bundle of wrapped leaves, hissing gently. Someone nods toward it. Cloud cakes, they say. Of course they are. You're handed a drink before you can ask what that means. It's warm, thick, and tastes like roasted nuts and rainwater. Somewhere between soup and tea. You sip it, then sip it again, just to make sure it's real. It is. And it's wonderful. Today, you're learning about flavors. Not just food, taste as identity. In this city, recipes are rarely fixed. They're remembered by mouthfeel. Texture and rhythm matter as much as ingredients. That bitter twist at the back of your throat? That's intentional. Astringent berries are added not to punish the tongue, but to wake it up. One man hands you a spoon of mashed root seasoned with ash. Not salt, ash. From a specific tree that grows near the river. Tastes like old promises, he says, grinning. He's not wrong. You watch as two women debate whether to add fermented palm pulp to a stew. They don't argue. They trade sips, laugh, shake their heads, trade again. Finally, one snaps her fingers, adds a pinch of crushed bark, and declares the stew finished. The other doesn't protest. Apparently, that was the correct answer. Anthropologists still debate whether Amazonian cooking was driven more by necessity or preference. Many assumed it was purely utilitarian, subsistence over sensation. But these flavors say otherwise. Here, cooking is cultural memory you can chew. You're invited to help prepare a meal. Your task: whisk air into paste. Yes, air. A root is pounded into cream, then beaten rhythmically until it fluffs up like mousse. It's not ready until it sighs, someone tells you. You beat harder. It resists, then relents. Later, someone brings out a dish only made for farewells. It's tangy, floral, and oddly comforting. They call it echo fruit. You don't ask what that means. Some things are better left ambiguous. As the meal winds down, you notice people offering bites to the air. Just small gestures, holding a fruit toward the trees, placing a crumb on a leaf. Not superstition, exactly. More like etiquette. Everything feeds something, your guide explains. And everything fed you first. You spend the afternoon with one of the city's flavor keepers, a person whose job is to memorize the taste of seasons. Not preserve them in jars or journals, but in stories. They describe a drought year by the way mushrooms grew bitter. A stormy spring by the tang in the river moss. You ask how they keep track. Same way you remember a voice, they say. You don't write it down. You carry it. As the sky dims and the air cools, the city gathers one last time for an evening bite. Not a feast, not a ritual. Just small bowls and quiet conversation. A little sweet. A little sour. Like goodbyes should be. You sit under a tree, licking juice from your fingers, and realize, this place isn't defined by what it built. It's defined by what it tasted like. The final night in the city feels like the last chapter of a book you didn't know you were reading. The rhythms of daily life have woven into your skin, like the thread in the baskets, like the marks left by the tattoo you once feared would fade. It's not that you understand everything, it's that you feel it. The way everything, from the fish you caught with silk thread to the laughter shared over bitter root, is connected in a tapestry too intricate for your eyes to fully trace. But somehow, it feels like you belong here. Tonight, the city doesn't throw a grand farewell. Instead, it offers you something even more meaningful, a quiet transition. The sky turns dark, but not abruptly, like the fading of an old song. People move to the clearing without instruction. There are no speeches. No, thank you for visiting, or we'll miss you, because here, leaving isn't something to mourn. It's just part of the ongoing rhythm. The fire in the center of the circle flickers, not with urgency, but with ease, like a breath drawn in and then exhaled. One by one, the people around you add something to the fire, an offering that feels more symbolic than ceremonial. A handful of seeds, a scrap of cloth, a bead from a necklace. It's not about giving up possessions. It's about acknowledging what the forest has already given to you, what the city has shared. Someone starts singing again, not loudly, but softly, like the wind is the instrument and they're just guiding it. The song drifts through the air, a simple melody that feels older than the trees around you, older than the stars above. You don't understand the words, but you don't need to. It's a farewell, but it's also an invitation to return, not physically, but in memory, in spirit, in the moments that will echo back to you when you need them most. As you sit there, listening, you realize something profound. This city wasn't just built on the labor of its people. It was built on their ability to let go, to fade away when the season was over, to offer stories and food and breath without fear of losing them. Everything here is temporary, but it's never less valuable because of that. The city doesn't need monuments. It doesn't need records. It lives in the whispers of the forest, in the taste of the fruit, in the rhythm of hands at work. You're handed a final gift, a small bundle wrapped in leaves. Inside, there's a single seed, dark and smooth, with a pattern on it that you swear looks like a spiral. The person who gives it to you doesn't explain. They don't need to. The seed is all the explanation you'll ever need. You hold it, feeling the weight of it, the promise of it. This seed is a piece of the city that won't fade, no matter where you go. You tuck it away, knowing it's not something you need to plant or nurture. It's something to carry, a memory, a story, a reminder of everything you felt here. As the night deepens, the fire dies down to embers. The voices trail off into silence, and one by one, the people slip away into the trees, leaving you alone in the quiet glow of the dying fire. The stars above are a familiar blanket now, the sky an old friend. And just like that, you realize something else. The city didn't vanish. It became you. You are the memory. You are the story, now wrapped in vine, feather, and bone. You carry it with you, and in time, it will fade from your consciousness, as everything does. But it will still be there, woven into your rhythm, your breath, your heartbeat. Because this city didn't need to be found. It was always waiting for you to discover it. And now that you've seen it, you'll never forget the way it tasted. You stand, stretch, and walk back toward the boat. The journey home is quiet, the way journeys often are. The forest hums softly, the river whispers its final goodbyes, and you leave, but only to return in another way, someday, somewhere. You smile and step into the boat. The seed in your pocket, a silent promise that the story hasn't ended. It's just beginning.